Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining this monthly SAM Best Practice webinar. Like every month, I have the pleasure to spend an hour with you and introduce some of the coming features or some of the existing best practices that have been developed over the years in software asset management. My name is Nicolas Rousseau, and I'm a product manager for FlexNet Manager, FlexNet Manager, and Flexera One ITAM. And this March session will cover a very sensitive topic, which is managing, understanding, and prioritizing the unrecognized applications. So we will go for a full hour together, and I will move forward with the agenda. So the agenda will first cover the last session pointers and the answers to the questions. Last session that was on Java and Windows Server Optimization, the coming features for Windows 2021 R1.4. Then I will go through some news, which are quite redundant with what we saw last time, so I will not spend too much time on the two topics. You can actually go back to the previous session to get information. And we will go through the topic of the day, which is quite vast, actually, around managing the unrecognized applications. So I will try to make it very step-by-step and explain how it works, show you how to prioritize the efforts, how the report that I will introduce can help you in that approach, and really cover the topic step-by-step. So, about the news, I think that the news will be here. So just on the news very quickly, the FNMS 2021 R1.4, so FNMS Cloud, this is the cloud version, will be released on 16th of March and will contain a number of new features that you can access going on the docs portal. This docs portal, let's go, that includes the list of features that have been released over the last years. If you go to the cloud instance, features, FNMS Cloud, you will see that you have more details than the on the on-premise feature list, because once a month or once every second month we have FNMS Cloud releases. And of course, the on-prem release, the next one being planned for April 2022, end of April, the FNMS 2022 R1 on-premise release will include basically all the features that have been released since July 2021. So July 2021 was the 2021 R1, which was both cloud and on-premise. And then you see all these features that have been released. I've covered most of them during the monthly previous best practices call, and particularly what we have coming in March has been, in general covered by the best practices call. The Microsoft Server Windows, the Microsoft Windows Server Optimization report will be released, which was presented in details last time. A new application transparency report will also be introduced along with a file exemption pass, an exemption by file pass feature, which are basically aiming to cover the Java embedded instances automation. So basically a feature, and again, you can go back to the recording that I will show later. The embedded Java instances will not impact your license consumption. And that's part of these two features that will come soon. As well, Power Linux can be inventoried with the agent. So there is an extension of the agent capabilities for Power Linux. So we have done also changes, on the Kubernetes agent around security. So the individual beacons are now displayed a more convenient way in the discovery tasks for the system task, and SQL Server Optimization report So yeah, also includes the the fact that a virtual machine could be hosted in Azure or in a cloud provider instance. So this is just one more column to the existing SQL Server optimization report that was released back in December. So every time you can deep dive into a small summary that will give you more information. And of course, the online help will provide even more details. Okay, so that's about the news, and let's move back to the presentation, and let's focus on the next step, which is the useful pointers. So the last session was around Windows Server optimization and Java, and if you click on this link, you will access to the recording. A recording that is in a YouTube video, and you will also access to the detailed agenda that allows. Knowing that the video is also indexed, thanks to Mark, actually Mark was France who told me that. So we have now the video which contains the various steps of the agenda, and of course the presentation that was used during the session. So just as a small reminder, but since you are attending this call, that's probably that you got access to the announcements. But the series and the webinars are always introduced and presented, and the recordings are also uploaded in this events and webinar section of the Community Hub. Just a little reminder, if you go to any registration page for the next, so you accept this one already, but you will see that it's quite practical. If you go to this monkey survey, you will see what are the possible next topics. You can vote for the topics, knowing that this managing unrecognized evidence was actually the next unaddressed topic. And you can also see what are the topics that have been covered so far. So, Oracle optimization reports back in July last year, Red Hat optimization, SQL optimization reports back in September last year, Oracle management, so a full session explaining how inventory works, how the licensing works on Oracle, metering and software usage, which was in November, and finally the last report. And every time, of course, you get the link back to the presentation, to the announcement, and the video and the files. Okay, so that's, I hope you see some continuity in these SAM best practices calls. They happen every month. There was a little break around December, around Christmas, but this is going to move forward, and there are so many topics around software asset management that, that there would be, I will be glad to hold and to drive the presentations, or maybe invite some people who will maybe introduce to topics that I cannot cover myself. Let's move to the next and the beginning of this bigger topic, which is this month's topic, how to manage unrecognized applications. Knowing that it's a quite sensitive topic, so I started with some context. Of course, without inventory, you see here that that's sort of a process flow of software asset management. What do we do when we do software asset management? We have first, inventory data, which is imported through multiple inventory sources. It could be FlexNet Manager, it could be SCCM. This raw signatures and this raw inventory is normalized by the application recognition library. And second pillar is to import purchase. And of course, in the middle, you create the licenses that will give you the license position or even optimal license position. So that's nice. And just think about somebody with two legs. If one leg is missing, you can't walk, you can't run, and definitely having a reliable inventory, I don't need to convince you, but having a reliable inventory is a pillar, the first step of trusting SAM. To take another allegory, this is like the Maslow pyramid. There are the boring but necessary things that you see on the bottom, which are, having a reliable inventory, understanding what's happening, transparency, understanding how you manage software asset management. That could be brought by KPIs. And this part, I said boring for with provocation, but this necessary part is the step without which having the optimization, chargeback, for instance, or reclamation, advanced dashboarding parts wouldn't make sense. If you see, in the nice new Oracle reports that, for instance, a cluster is causing an overspend of 5 million euro on advanced compression, that's exciting. But if, let's say, a third of your inventory is missing, which means that you have some virtual machines inside with Oracle without an agent installed, you would just, boast yourself that you could do some optimization, but you are missing the truth, which is provided by an accurate inventory. So fortunately, Oracle is one of these top-tier vendors where the risk of unrecognized evidence is very low, even more that the Oracle inventory is a specific inventory, so we know what we collect because this is performed by the Oracle inventory, by the agent during the Oracle inventory. But if we summarize, the situation, there are today 360K applications which are recognized, which is big. All depends, number of recognized applications actually they relies on the level of normalization we apply. So this is 360K, but if we were managing the normalization at minor level, for instance, application 1.2.3, we would have probably 2 or 3 million applications recognized. But that's one item I will insist on. The level of normalization, actually, the less you normalize, and the better, actually, you can cover the recognition. So I will spend time on that, but that's a very key item. And yes, we have 360K applications, 1 million evidences, but there will be always gaps. And that's a quite painful conversation. We have some time with and I've experienced as a consultant for 8 years before being a product manager. If you start a compliance project and can't be sure that what you are working on is the reality of what has been deployed, that's a very, very uncomfortable position. But there will be gaps. And, there are some reasons, good or bad reasons, why there could be gaps, applications which are not recognized. The first one, is I would say it's a good reason, or it's a sad truth of IT operations. If your IT operation team uses a packaging tool, and if they use, during the packaging, if they rename the package to basically have a better traceability of their deployed applications. I've seen a lot, as a consultant, Acrobat package 222, Acrobat 10, for instance, it was a while ago. You could, you can, of course, modify what will be collected by the add remove program, which are the installer evidences, and the recognition performed by the application recognition library will stop working correctly, of course. So I would say best practice, because this is about the best practices. Best practice is to ask the packaging team not to rename the packages. There are other places where they could store the package number, because we understand the need for tracing what package has caused which application to be installed. So really, if the deployment team can avoid using this renaming of the name of the add remove program application or evidence, that's a very good thing. So that's a good reason, I would say, or that's a sad reason, but that exists. Another one that is actually a bad reason, this is unintentional. Flexera does not sometimes have all the versions of all the applications, or let's say a new application has been released, which is not yet recognized. And basically what's happening is that that's a mix between, getting the unrecognized evidence management requests. So people open tickets, and as quickly as possible, we process the requests, and we talk probably about 4,000, 5,000 new titles a month. So that's quite high, but of course, this is not enough, and there are always gaps. I've been the first shocked sometimes seeing Acrobat 2021 not being continuous, not being recognized, and very quickly, of course, the version got recognized, but that could be a small latency. So that's what I could call a gap. And a second thing, which is intentional on our side, is that we can't recognize all applications. There are millions of applications, so we intentionally focus on the commercial applications. We have a tier-based approach, so tier one vendors such as Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, Adobe. So there is a number of vendors by tier, and we try to be as exhaustive as possible. And sometimes for some free application, which I would say have a lower interest, we focus and we keep our focus on the, I would say, more critical applications. So that's the reason why there could be unrecognized applications, but that's a fact that this is something we need to manage. Otherwise, you can't trust the compliance activity or the license position that you produce. And then, repeated, I started with that, but if you want to take advantage of the shiny value of SAM, you need to have the foundation right. So understand the gaps and fix them. So moving to the next step, an application, I will open FlexNet just to show you the real data, but in the end, an application is a structured record in the application recognition library. We have a product, let's say Visio, which is what I've focused on here. We have a version, which is, let's say, 2016. I took this example in the library. And important to know, behind the scene, there is a version sequence, which is called version weight. So the ARL knows behind the scene that 2016 was released after 2013, for instance, and before 2019. It may sound a little bit stupid because the versions are numerical, but knowing that XP for Windows was released before Windows 10 or Windows 7 is more challenging. So we have this sort of managed sequence of versions, which is used a lot actually when you create a license. If a license includes upgrades rights or downgrade rights, we will massively use this version weight to a version sequence to know what are the covered applications for the license. Edition, same thing. We know the sequence of editions, and of course, an application is linked to a publisher. The application, which is this structured record, is recognized. So recognized through installer evidence. I would say 90% of the case. I will be insistent on the fact that what we should focus on is installer evidence first. And typically, an installer evidence could be, I will actually open this Windows, this Visio 2016 product. So let's go to the FlexNet UI. I will go back to the applications. So let's go to all applications. And I had already filtered this one. If I go to Visio Professional, you see that we have this structure. And we have additional information sometimes, which is coming. And you have this status, just as maybe opening a parenthesis. This status is basically unmanaged is, if there are some instances of the application that have been inventoried on some computers. Before it's unmanaged, actually, there would be, sorry, when an application is not found at all, it's actually, that's fun. I'm not seeing what I'm expecting. So I'm going back to the full list of all applications. And you have, this inactive status. Actually, you can't change the status to inactive because this is out of the box. If no inventoried application has been found, it will be inactive. And then it will be unmanaged if it has been found, but not, you made no decision on what is the status of the application. And finally, it could be authorized or unauthorized. This is just used for filtering It has no influence actually on how a license will calculate consumption. So, any application linked to a license will consume whatever the status is. This is more to help on the dashboard or report. So if I go back to this application, you see the product, you see the status, classification, of course, commercial or not. And one thing I will show actually on the evidences. So the application is recognized through evidences. So far, so good. This is quite simple. We have the installer evidence. And typically, here what we see is actually an ARL evidence, which is already containing some intelligence on how to recognize correctly. I will come back here actually a little bit later in my presentation, but you see that we recognize through installer, file, WMI, eventually access, and suite and members. I will come back to that, but that's what you see in a record of an installation, and I will come back to this record a little bit later. So let's go back here. So the recognized evidence, the raw evidence here, is actually what we don't see in FNMS. We see it only on the real computer record. I will go back here to show you a raw evidence. But the raw evidence is really what exists on the machine. And typically, this would be Visio 2016 Professional or Professional/EN. The version would be 16.3.2.1. I took a random number. The publisher may be, Microsoft Software Corporation. I took a little bit a dummy example, and the evidence here. I'm taking another example of file evidence that could link to this. That could be related to Visio. And you will see the big game here is to link the raw evidences to the application through a mapping logic, a matching logic that includes a number of criteria. So, going to just to give you the big picture, this is a raw evidence. This is a real name. I took this time a real name. This raw evidence will match to an ARL evidence, which is Microsoft Visio Professional 2016, and which has, you see, these wildcards that allow to better manage subversion that could be discovered. And that's why, I was saying the less precise the normalization is, the better level of recognition you will have. And I will explain a little bit later. And finally, this ARL evidence, which is what you see in the evidences tab, will map to the ARL application, which is recognized through the ARL evidence that is actually catching some raw evidences. And maybe here, that's worth going back to the TextNet. Let's trace, from a device up to the application. So if you open whatever device record, you will see that we have this evidence tab that actually was not here. So that was added not so long time ago. And this evidence tab, which now gives you, the raw data. You see these. So if I type Visio, it's done that. You see this raw evidence, which has a raw version. If that was a file, you would even see a raw path eventually. You can add the path. Maybe the path is already here. So raw file path. Okay, so maybe my demo data is quite old, so it was actually created at a time where we were not catching actually the raw file path, but on the recent version with the recent import, you would see that. And this evidence tab will show you the full link between the raw evidence. Oh, let's go back to the raw evidence. What was the recognized application? And in between, there was an evidence, including the wildcard that allowed to recognize Office Visio Professional. So I'm a little bit insistent on how it works, but when people, access this all evidence screen, what they see most of the time is not what is on the machine. That's where it can be quite confusing. As soon as an evidence is coming from Flexera, you see the source. That's another important thing to understand. You have a source for the application or a source for the evidence. If an evidence is Flexera, take away all the filters on Visio, this evidence has a good chance to have some wildcards, these persons. And this is actually what will allow to recognize the applications. So an unknown evidence, so if you say assigned equals no and ignored equals no on the flat list of my evidences, you will see that we get a lot of assigned is no and ignored is no. Okay. Yeah, assigned is yes, sorry. Assigned is yes. And ignored is no. So you will see here, the list of installer evidence that are used by the list of installer evidences, which are actually created by the library. It's nearly 1 million. And each of these evidences are actually, not the raw evidence you find on the servers or the computers. These are sort of clever evidence that will allow to catch the subversion that we don't want to manage. Okay, so one thing I did not mention yet, let's imagine Flexera has an evidence that you don't like. It can happen. And you don't want this evidence to create a recognition. Know that everything is read-only on an installer evidence or file evidence coming from Flexera, except a very important thing, which is the status. You can actually ignore an evidence, which will prevent from using this evidence for recognition. So this call is more on how to extend the recognition, how to manage and recognize application, but be aware that you can do the reverse, which is stopping to recognize following a certain approach, which Flexera thought was good. You can actually ignore an evidence, which will allow you to use maybe another evidence or another normalization level. So I will leave the page, not save. So I'm going back to the process. This is quite simple, but in the end, that can be quite complex because these, wildcards are, and you need to, that would be a big point. If you extend the recognition of FlexNet, you will need actually to use wildcards to be consistent with the normalization level of the application. Here, this is a major version level. So you see 69% is at major version level. And if you, by using the wildcards, you ensure that you will get sort of strong evidences that will not require to be added again and again to the library. And that's one item I insist on a little bit. So if we talk about the different types of evidences and the different level of interest, so installer evidence is by far the most used by FlexNet ERL or Flexera ERL for the recognition, and by Technopedia, by the way, which is 100% using installer evidences. And these evidences are the add remove, but can also be the RPM on Unix and uninstalled eventually on Windows. So there are many installer evidence types. And these evidences have the interest that most of the case, an application, a commercial application that you install will leave something, depending on how you deploy it, but normally it leaves something. And what will be left as an add remove program will be pretty normalized already, or pretty meaningful, which means that you will get the edition. For instance, Visio.exe doesn't have any edition in it. But Visio Professional EN, English package, for instance, has one. There are, more interesting, less numerous. We're not talking about millions of evidence names, but more tens of thousands, which is already quite big. As I said earlier, they are influenced by the packaging. So be careful that your packaging activity is not modifying them. Knowing that if your packaging activity modifies the ad remove program, you can absolutely extend the library. It takes, it's painful. It takes, let's say, 1 hour to manage Adobe. I remember that for a big customer. I spent maybe 2 hours by collecting each of the unrecognized evidence, but in the end, that's manageable. Other warning, they are not always present. I've seen that a lot on Unix. Depending on how you install the applications, it could be just a file transfer, which takes away, unfortunately, the value of these installer evidences. Second type of evidence, the file evidence that we don't use a lot actually for the recognition. You see here, there are 3 types of recognition rule, and you will see 90% of the case the file evidences are not for recognition. Not for recognition means that actually we use the file evidence if we get some usage. If an application was recognized, let's say Visio 2016 Professional was recognized, but we had a last use date and a duration of usage from the metering of SCCM or of LMS agent, we will be able to attach this usage, which relates to a file evidence that has a poor, actually, information for recognition, but we will attach this usage to the recognized application, and the application will have been recognized through the installer evidence. So file evidence for usage, the notable exception for file evidence recognition is Java. I will not spend 1 more hour on Java, but this is, Java.exe is the best thing to understand where Java is installed, if the evidence is embedded or not, if the instance is embedded. So typically, Java could be interesting, or for Unix applications. Another type of evidence you see here, WMI. WMI is quite specific. These are additional registry query that are run by the agent that will collect for Windows Server, for Windows, for SQL Server or Acrobat, continuous. So here we parse the software ID tag. The WMI evidences can be used, but I would say this is the exception. But when they are used, it means that they are really critical and needed. And finally, you have the access evidence. Will not deep dive, but this is related to the client access logging usage. So when you inventory a Windows Server, you will get all RDP sessions. This user from this machine has accessed the server using an RDP access, or you will get also SQL client access logging, which unfortunately cannot be so useful for the SQL CAL because that could be multiplexing. So you could have one user, SA, accessing the application with 25 people behind the scene using a Flexera manager, for instance. So I would say, the access usage is not so much used for the classical application recognition. And the suits, finally, suits, I will not deep dive, but a suite is a combination of application. So this is what you see here. You can define which are the standalone applications, how many applications at minimum you need to have, and if they are required or not. So applications here are used like evidences, but of course, this is not exactly in today's context, because today is about unrecognized evidences. So a standalone application will be recognized even if you could create a suite, which includes this standalone application. Okay, so I'm moving forward. This was a little bit to give you the context of the recognition, how it works, and on the priority. You will see I will finish this session showing you a report that helps prioritizing, because this is quite complex. However, there is one way of prioritization which is quite efficient. This is first, focusing on the installer evidence. Don't try to do, file evidence management and have 100% of your file evidences managed. I've seen customers with massive Unix deployments, knowing that the Unix evidences contained in the file the path, so it multiplies the number of file names, actually. I've seen customers with 60 millions or 70 millions file evidence, which were multiplied by the number of instances. So these were billions of file evidences. And the big first best practice advice is focus on installer evidence. And of course, this is sort of a priority list. Start with your managed vendors, knowing that some mature customers have 50 vendors managed, which makes it more complex. But when you start a project, if you do, let's say, Windows or Microsoft license position, that's not actually incredibly complex. I will show you. For instance, you need basically to manage this list of unrecognized evidence. You need to focus on the installer evidence, which in this demo system are probably quite numerous, but not incredibly numerous. By comparison, this one has probably 1.2 million, if I remember well, entries. Which is just discouraging. And the idea that for the vendors in scope, 1.6 million, for the vendors in scope on the installer evidence, this is quite boring, but you need basically to focus on, let's say, Microsoft. And the idea that you need to have this list empty. Here at 27, which is quite easy. And the idea that anything that sounds like a useless application, and here you will see with Microsoft the list could be quite fast. But what you need to do is ignore the signature that relate to non-commercial applications that you have no problem to keep under the radar. So you can by batch ignore the evidence. I would say the SCOM agent is probably something I want to keep an eye on, and the CCM tools, not sure on this one. I will ignore this one. So in the end, this is quite fast, but this is vendor by vendor. And when the number of vendors is augmenting, this is a little bit more an issue. But you need basically regular monitoring of this installer evidence, unrecognized installer evidence list by vendor. And really, this is a reasonable objective to have 0 unrecognized evidence that is not ignored, because this, that there is another list which shows the ignored evidences. So here you will see there is quite a mess. But what you want to focus on is I'm not missing any of my important installer evidences, and you can go through the list and basically take away the useless evidences. Power BI, I would definitely keep this one. That would be for later. But you need to basically recognize and extend the library with the interesting one, but ignore all the other ones. Okay, so I'm moving back to the presentation. Ignore the evidences which are freeware, link to applications. You will see that that's what I will show step by step, and keep the list empty for the list of managed vendors. On the file side, I remember painful conversations with some customers. Mr. Flexera, I'm seeing 6 million unrecognized evidences. So here is the list, a big CSV export. Please manage. And unfortunately, that's a waste of time and energy to fight the noise. We are planning to do a better job in ignoring out of the box some of the file evidences that everybody has, typically Unix servers, distribution files which have no licensing interest. We already have today something like 600,000 or maybe 140,000 files which are ignored. And this list will augment. The goal is to decrease the noise that you have, but we will never, decrease completely the noise. Another initiative we're having right now, which you should be aware of, is that Unix evidences, which often are not very interesting and often are very numerous. We have a plan to give an option to customers to keep the Unix evidences out of FlexNet and even out of Inventory Manager, which is the inventory database for FlexNet Manager, for all Unix evidences, which will not be matched against the recognition rules. So in the end, we try to keep the dirt out, which has a very nice performance impact. The file evidence recognition, I said, it's used in 10% or maybe 2% of the cases, file evidences, but it's probably causing, I would say, 40% of the import time, because matching the file based on the names and so on, given the quantities, is a very, very SQL-intensive activity. So, but you should be opportunistic with file evidences. We are going to expand a little bit on TIBCO for some specific jar files, or Log4j. That there has been a lot of noise on Log4j, and there is in the community a way of extending the recognition of the .jar files, but limited to Log4j to avoid the millions of other jar files. Opportunistically, this is worth using a file. Most of the case, this is worth managing and managing a clean list of unrecognized installer evidences. So there are two flows, and two situations. You find an unrecognized evidence. That's a little bit what I was showing. You need to guess what is the product. And very often, when we talk about installer evidence, this is quite intuitive. And we need to check other similar recognized evidences. Is it a new version of an already recognized product? And, if we don't know, we can check, what device it is on. And even in the end, you could contact the owner and say, hey, guy, it seems you are using a computer which had this cryptic application name. We fear it could be, a commercial application. You can Google it, of course. And from the, unrecognized evidence record, you can go down to the user, Power BI, for instance, and that's something that has been added quite recently, actually, this one. The list of devices linked to an unrecognized evidence or an evidence is now available in FlexNet. It came with 2021. And from the user managing the device, you could eventually, understand who is doing what and understand what the application is. So these are the two flows, or the first flow actually, from an existing unrecognized evidence. I've seen other cases which are a little bit more painful. That you have purchased some licenses for an application, and you can first look for unrecognized evidences if there are some matching names, by filtering on the name of the evidence, on the name of the vendor, and so on. And eventually, if you don't find or can't find any signature related to this application, and it could be well that this application has no signature. There are some applications which are activated by the license key. So vSphere, for instance, we collect the vSphere versions and editions from the vCenter import. But why can we recognize vCenter editions? Just because vCenter from the management console tells us which is the edition that has been deployed on the ESX servers. So keep in mind, knowing that an application exists and that and not finding any unrecognized evidence can be a pain. And in the end, you may finish with checking on a specific device that should have the application, and you need to dig. That's quite painful. And even in the end, the answer could be, sorry, there is nothing that can be inventoried. So we will finish with eventually allocating the machine to the license and putting, or storing somewhere the information that this application is used on this machine, but there is no found evidence. And you could use a permanent allocation that will actually consume like if the device was installed with the application. So these are the two big flows. And I will, so you will see this is quite illustrated in this PowerPoint. I will do that in FlexNet, and you will see first thing, from unrecognized evidences. So let's go to evidence or insider evidences. I found on my demo system that I had 2 Acrobat reader ones, and I would say in this case this is nearly an intentional lack of recognition, or this is not a big issue because this is a freeware. So Acrobat, let's go. And you see here that I have 2, products and 2 raw evidences. So when the when the source is local, we'll add the source. Of course, when you don't recognize an application, it means that what you see here is not the ARL evidence. This is a raw evidence that has no wildcard, nothing. And from here, what you can do is extend the recognition. And actually, maybe I should go back to my PowerPoint. I wanted to introduce the notion of clever evidence. So, we match and recognize the application based on a number of attributes. So an insider evidence, the display name, the version, the type of evidence, and you could put any, which means you don't want to filter, and the publisher will be the criteria used to recognize the application through insider evidence. Then, the file evidence, we will use the file name, the file version, the description, the company, and the size, which is a pain because very often you don't want to use the size. I've put here, screenshots, but you see here, this is the identification section, and there is a status. And as I said, you could ignore if you don't like the Flexera evidence, for instance. And on the file evidence, you see that there is this additional, size component. The description is used, the file name, and the file version. So in the end, to create a clever evidence, you need to understand what will be used by the ARL recognition script. So these are the fields you should focus on. And typically, an unrecognized evidence will have a raw version, 16.0.5, for instance. And the clever evidence is the one that is aligned with the application normalization. So let's say, you have Visio 2016 professional, which is actually technically 16 dot something. This is better to create an evidence that says, 16% with Microsoft %, then adding one by one the raw evidences that have been inventoried to the application, because every new minor version, let's say 16.0.5 here, would not be captured if you, and this is way more work, if you subversion by subversion found an unrecognized evidence and added it. So the really important thing is to find the unrecognized evidence. I will show on Acrobat. Make a decision on the normalization level, and then create and tune actually the raw evidence into something that will make sense for the level of normalization you want to have, to avoid, more issues. So if I go back to FlexNet, you see here that I have 2 raw evidences, which are actually both linked to Acrobat 19.0. And I've checked, Acrobat in FlexNet is actually managed at the minor version level, which I think is maybe not the best thing. So expect the normalization level to maybe be less granular in the future. FlexNet has a need for licensing, and managing a minor or even minor version, even for a commercial application, in a licensing perspective doesn't make sense. So, and even more that now we have this application transparency report that shows the details of the raw evidence mapped to the recognized application. So just as a context, Acrobat has a 19.0 version. And what you do here, you actually can edit the insider evidence. You can make it clever, which is really, really super important. So I would keep the dot, because if one day version 190 is released, I don't want it to be captured by this evidence. You put the percent here. Publisher, sometimes you see Adobe Systems, Adobe, you could keep a percent or not. I would put a percent here. And, Acrobat Reader DC, it looks quite generic. I imagine that if there was a 19 or 20 version, it would not be impacting the name, so no need for a wildcard here. And that's it. I'm saving this unrecognized evidence, which was local, but I've made it actually more generic. And even before I'm going to assign this evidence to an application, I will delete the other one, because if you check carefully, and that's where you need to be a little bit careful. Sorry, I'm editing, and it's actually 19.0%, because we manage at the minor version Acrobat Reader in the error. So if I close that, you see that this evidence that I've made more clever is catching this one. So this is Adobe percent. Okay, it will be captured. This is the same description. Perfect. The version is consistent, so it will be also matched against this one. And what you need to be aware, and it took me some time to understand that, is that if you don't delete the overlapping row evidences, they will stay as unrecognized. So there is no harm deleting an evidence, because if I did something wrong, if I deleted an evidence that was actually useful, the next import will recreate it. So don't think that you are changing the application library of Flexera. No, you are changing the local, local evidences. You cannot delete Flexera evidence. And if you made a mistake by thinking there was an overlap, the next day you will see the other evidence coming back as unrecognized. So now I've made, my evidence more generic, more clever. I'm going to assign it. And, if I say Acrobat Reader 19, I'm now opening the full application recognition library. I have this, Reader MUI DC 19.0. So you see it's where we manage at the minor version level Acrobat. And, I have two choices. If I find the application I like, I can just add, and that's it. Or if, let's say that was Acrobat, we check, but either an Acrobat, let's say 23, let's take a future version, to be sure we won't find anything. Oh, I had an Acrobat 23, let's imagine evidence. You can create an application. And the application, you need actually, okay, so you need to find the existing product, Acrobat Reader. So here, I'm going to look for the products created by Flexera. You will see is local will be no. These are real products. Acrobat Reader, of course, exists. Or I see, this Acrobat Reader MUI DC. Actually, this is what I was finding. And once you select the product, you see that the publisher is inherited from the product. Okay, this is clean. This is linked to Adobe. Very good. And then the version, you see that you can create a new version, let's say 23. I took the example. And then you can move. You remember this version, version sequence that I was talking about. So you can create a 23 version. Okay. And then you can say, this is local, this is a freeware. That's why maybe it was not recognized. And the description, actually, the full name, needs to be realigned. So this is Acrobat Reader MUI DC. So we will be consistent with the other versions, DC 19.0, 23 actually, .0. Okay, so I'm checking again, the version. So I should have said 23.0. Again, this minor normalization level. And that's it. So I can here, create this sort of anticipated version of Acrobat. And I just wanted to show you, that you can build and be careful to start from an existing product. You don't want to create two product trees with a new version that you created locally. No, you can create a new version which is local, on an out-of-the-box product so that the license upgrade downgrade rights apply correctly. That was the warning on that. And now, so I faked a little bit the signature of the recognized application. It was a 19.0, but you see that we have the choice, adding to an existing evidence or creating a new application, adding to an existing application or creating a new application. And just to let's imagine Flexera adds this application to the library. You will get, you will have the ability to delete this local application just to make sure that you have only one recognized application. Honestly, it would not be a big deal if you had Acrobat 19 local and Acrobat 19 Flexera recognized. Even in terms of license consumption, if you have more than one installation of a given product covered by a license, it doesn't consume more in 99% of the case. So just be aware that creating a local application that anticipates a version that Flexera will find is not causing a big issue, will be fixable in the future by just deleting the local overlapping applications. Okay, and then, and I will go a little bit over the next 6 minutes. Managing unrecognized evidence can be discouraging because, I show you on the non-vendors, but now let's imagine you have 50 vendors, or even you would like Flexnet to better recognize the application, but for all vendors that are already in the library. The issue, is that you could have a massive number of unrecognized evidences across vendors. For the file evidence, it's even worse, of course. This could be millions. So how to find the priorities, how to get more trust, because in the end, this is really a matter of trust. The idea and the report I've published in the community, actually just today, but you will find it in this link. The idea, and that's one thing we have started to do with Technopedia, and that we're extending on the ERL side. An idea is to use the past to enlighten the future, of course. And the idea that when we recognize version 1, 2, and 3 of a product, or 1, 2, and 4, which happens sometimes, unfortunately, why couldn't we recognize the intermediate versions or the future version? And this is what we could call, artificial intelligence-based recognition, which is basically following the logic of the script, the report. I will demo now. And the report is actually, catching the unrecognized evidences. I will show it on the screen. It will be easier. Catching the unrecognized evidences. This is a report you can install on-prem, but expect that, like for many other reports that have been implemented in the last year, this one will come soon. And the report goal is to say, I'm going to recognize. It's already run, actually. So the report is called Unrecognized Installer Evidence Analysis. And when you run the report is actually finding all the unrecognized evidences. It's quite simple. And it's checking and looking for what I would call the brother evidences, which are on the right. And how do we recognize a brother evidence? So this is here, brother evidence version, brother evidence publisher. The sort of similar or matching evidence is just found from the what I would call a clean name, which is basically the evidence in a remove program evidence name where the versioning has been removed. So in the end, the report starts with catching all the unrecognized evidences, 3,200 here. And then it's from this clean name finding some matching evidences which have been recognized and that eventually have even been licensed. And the idea that if you sort by priority, this report, you will see that the report actually, so sometimes, it didn't find anything, probably for freeware or maybe less interesting. But here, I'm not sure. I think it's more a problem on my side, but I have, diagnostic pack 12C release 1, which is not recognized as a not remove program evidence. And the report will say, okay, you should, create an insider evidence, and it is a priority one because, this is related to an existing evidence. So I took whatever version, it was an 11 here. And this evidence is mapped to an application, which is called Diagnostic Pack 11. Okay. And this application is actually, licensed. So this is a top priority unrecognized evidence. A commercial evidence application matched will be priority 2 evidence. And so the script, which is catching the unrecognized evidence and finding other evidences, will help you in the priority, knowing that when you have, so you can read the text, it takes a little bit of time, but if you have a priority 4 evidence, which means, there was maybe no evidence, or maybe the brother evidence, the brother application was a freeware. Okay, this is a freeware, I don't care so much. But you can then, prioritize your efforts in recognizing the applications. And where I say it's leading towards, the artificial intelligence related recognition, what we, can do in a report, which you can download if you're on-prem, that will help you. The file evidence version is coming soon. Actually, I was hoping to finish it for today, but it's not finished. What the report does, and it even suggests the evidence with the level of normalization with the wildcard at the right place, or even the creation of the application. Of course, this approach is something that Flexera as a vendor, and we know the millions of unrecognized evidence, or maybe not millions because we recognize a lot, but we know the insider evidence from cloud customers which have not been recognized. So the idea that not only this is a help for you to manage your unrecognized evidence, but this is a help for Flexera to be more reactive in creating and identifying the important unrecognized evidences and adding these thousands of applications and or insider evidence to the library with a limited effort and with a way less random approach. Because if nobody opens a ticket on version 2 and somebody opens a ticket on version 3, without this type of sort of automated matching script, we may have some gaps. And I'm sure you have seen, if you have spent a lot of time on the ARL, it may happen sometime that one version is not recognized. Sometimes, one version has not been released. That could be the reason. And sometimes you have inconsistency. So that's really an angle we're taking, which is using more, algorithm-based recognition and algorithm-based issue fixing, because there are some other analysis we can do on our side to make sure that the ARL is consistent, always normalizing for the same level of normalization for a given product. So there are many things we can do upstream, and there are things that can help you in your day-to-day work to trust that you have nothing under the radar that could be an issue and that could cause a risk on your on the reliability of your license position. Okay, so I've been a little bit longer than expected. Just finishing quickly. So that was a screenshot of the report. Yeah, you can go to the library to go to this to download this report. You will see there are other published solutions which could help you. Yeah, so in the community, I will let you look for a little bit there, but there is a gap analysis report, a set of reports actually. So these reports, and just anticipate that this will be part of the coming versions of FlexNet Cloud. So this report, will catch the inventory, the virtual machine that have not been inventoried by the agent, but that have been inventoried by vCenter. This is something that is actually in the database and that we will make more visible. Merged computer, this is a topic which is quite complex, where multiple computers could have their evidences aggregated. So Oracle inventory collection issue, this one is more about the catching the logs and the full details on the Oracle inventory. So I will not spend too much time, but check in the community. There are these reports and also unrecognized evidence. So then there are some other reports that have been released that could help you in this transparency. And of course, there is this transparency report that will be the last one I introduced, which is also in the library, which will be released in March for all customers. But the on-prem version is quite simple. So if you run this report, if you say DB2, if you run it, you will get the flat description of all the raw evidences that allow to recognize DB2 or eventually the member, which is under DB2. And you will get the full mapping between the raw evidence, the version or the type of file, .sys file, for instance, and the normalized application. So, just be aware that that's a big focus we have, which is bringing more transparency, and transparency on unrecognized evidence is a topic. That's what I addressed today. Transparency on recognized application is another topic, and this is now released, or this will be released in March. And there will be more to come about the something called the SAM operation dashboard that will provide all these answers to the questions you may have. Okay, I've been a little bit over the time. Thanks for your time. Hope you understood and saw some interesting things that will be useful for you. Don't hesitate. I will answer the questions which have been asked in the next session. And by the way, I addressed some questions I got for the last session in this PowerPoint. So you will see that once it will be uploaded. So don't hesitate to contact me or ask more questions, and they will be addressed in the next session. Thanks for your time, and talk to you soon.